A very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us from all around the world for today's webinar. I'm Shri RK, Head of New Initiatives at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, one of Asia's leading policy research institutions. On behalf of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, and the Council, I welcome you to today's webinar on a multilateral approach to building a global hydrogen economy. Today's session is focused on the multilateral effect required to build a global hydrogen economy via conducive international policies, technology co-development, pooled finances for demonstrations, and investments to create markets. Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Modi, announced on India's 75th Independence Day on 15th August 2021, India's National Hydrogen Mission, emphasizing the need to make India a global hub for green hydrogen production and export to boost its energy self-sufficiency and to inspire the global energy transition. Hydrogen's versatility as a fuel and low carbon footprint makes it a strategic choice for India's energy mix, especially for the hard-to-abate sectors and transportation. India is also a global champion for energy transition for the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy, which aims to promote the implementation of energy-related goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this context, we have also invited, on behalf of India, 4 other global champions for energy transition, Chile, Denmark, Germany, and the UK, to discuss the industrial energy transition without compromising on developmental goals and the role of hydrogen in this transition. We have an absolutely stellar panel today, broken up into 3 sessions. We will start with the plenary, follow that up with the country conversation, and then we'll have a corporate conversation. We will have with us very shortly, Honorable Minister, Union Cabinet Minister for New and Renewable Energy and Power, Sri RK Singh. We already have with us His Excellency Mr. Bhagwat Khubba, Honorable Minister of State, New and Renewable Energy and Chemical and Fertilizers, the Government of India. Welcome, sir. We have with us Mr. Indu Shekhar Chaturvedi, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, the Government of India. We also have with us very special guests from Chile, Denmark, UK, and Germany. We have with us His Excellency Mr. Juan Angulo, Ambassador of Chile to India, concurrent to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. Welcome, Ambassador. We have with us Mr. Martin Strandgaard, the Deputy Head of Mission, Ambassador of the Royal Danish Embassy to India. Dr. Steffen, Koch, Minister and Head of Department for Economics and Global Affairs, Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany. Welcome, Dr. Koch. And we'll have with us joining shortly Ms. Natalie, Economic, Climate and Development Counselor, British High Commission. Without further ado, I'm going to request my colleague, Dr. Deepak Yadav, to give our presentation, a very brief introduction to the Council's work on scaling up green hydrogen economy for India, and following which we'll go into the main part of the plenary. The slides are already on screen.
Okay, thanks, Shua. I hope I am audible. Okay, I welcome you all to the briefing presentation on scaling up green hydrogen economy for India. The Council on Energy, Environment and Water is among Asia's leading policy research institutions. We use data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach to explain or change the use, reuse, and misuse of resources. We work across 7 focus areas, plus we have a dedicated center on energy finance. Hydrogen has a very important role to play in global net zero scenarios. Today, about 32 countries, they are already developing policies or strategies for green hydrogen. At least 24 countries out of these 32 that we have analyzed have already set targets and pilots for green hydrogen. There are at least 10 multi-country or multi-firm platforms like IPHE and Hydrogen Council that aim to scale up the hydrogen ecosystem. But there are 3 major obstacles. The first obstacle is path dependency in national programs that could lead to suboptimal outcomes related to new technologies and end-use sectors. For example, we might end up consuming hydrogen, which is essentially produced from fossil fuels itself. The second, as evident from the graph here, image here, most of the countries in tropics have access to low renewable energy tariffs that can produce cost-effective green hydrogen, but bulk of the investments are occurring in developed economies that might or might not have access to good renewable energy resources. And the third and the most critical obstacle is the total absence of a global leadership on green hydrogen. Therefore, we propose a global green hydrogen alliance, or we call it as G2H2 alliance, which will be a multi-country, multi-institutional network to rapidly upscale the green hydrogen ecosystem in the world. The G2H2 Alliance will essentially follow a 6-step approach, which will have developing global inventory of clean hydrogen projects, periodic technology assessments, bilateral or plurilateral partnerships, pooled finances, and most importantly, respecting intellectual property rights and setting up safety standards for handling and transportation of hydrogen and its derivatives. India today roughly imports $140 billion of fossil fuels to meet its energy requirement, and green hydrogen can be one of the resources that can help realize the final aim of an Atmanirbhar or a self-reliant Bharat. Today, India consumes roughly 5.6 million tons per annum of hydrogen, essentially in fertilizer sectors and refineries. We also import significant amount of fertilizers and chemical commodities from outside. Now, if we take up the current demand and also go for import substitution, then the total potential market size of hydrogen in India could be about 7.5 MTPA. Now, this provides us an opportunity. The opportunity exists because of two primary reasons. The first being, we expect, since India is a developing country, we expect a twofold increase in the energy demand by 2040. That is first. And we expect more than 40% reduction in the cost of critical components like electrolyzers within the next 5 years. However, producing 7.5 MTPA of green hydrogen in India will need deployment of 200 gigawatts of solar energy, and an investment of about $230 billion. So there are opportunities, but there are also challenges. CEEW has been working on green hydrogen since 2018, and we have also provided inputs to MNRE in drafting the National Hydrogen Mission. Our analysis indicates that wheeling renewable electricity is actually cheaper than moving hydrogen in trucks or even pipelines. And the best way to start the green hydrogen ecosystem in India is by blending in green hydrogen in the existing refineries and fertilizer plants. What the graph on the left-hand side shows is the levelized cost of hydrogen on the y-axis against the green hydrogen blend on the x-axis. And here we showcase two scenarios. The first scenario is production of hydrogen using captive renewable electricity in blue. And the second is production of hydrogen using open access of renewable electricity. This graph is constructed for Koch in Gujarat. Here there are two key takeaways from the graph. First, for India, with the current state of economics, it makes no sense to go beyond a green hydrogen blend of 80 to 85% because there is a rapid increase in cost. The second and the most important thing is, as we get ambitious, which we will be, we see that the difference between the orange curve and the blue curve keeps on increasing. This difference essentially reflects the increase in price of hydrogen if we are producing hydrogen using open access of electricity. And therefore, as we get ambitious, it is very important that end consumers of green hydrogen have access to low cost, affordable, renewable electricity through open access mechanism. That is one. And the second is there should be long-term stability in prices. The third and the most important recommendation from our end, and this is from a carbon emissions perspective, is that electrolyzers, irrespective of whether they are operating on captive power or renewable power through open access, should have round-the-clock access to solar and wind electricity. Otherwise, running electrolyzers on grid power and captive power totally defeats the purpose of a green hydrogen ecosystem. Now, since we are talking about blending gray and green hydrogen, blending hydrogen in steel making is also very critical. This is primarily because, as you can see on the graph on the left-hand side, the graph indicates the levelized cost of steel on the y-axis and the carbon footprint of the steel on the x-axis. And here we show three temporal scenarios, essentially 2020 in blue, 2030 in orange, and 2040 in gray. Here there are two extremities. The extremity on the right has the highest emission footprint, which essentially uses 100% gray hydrogen derived from natural gas at $13.5 per MMBTU, and grid power that has a cost of about 7.6 rupees a unit. The left extremity is fossil-free steel production, which is essentially working on 100% green hydrogen and renewable power. Here, the gray strip that we see, that essentially shows the cost of producing steel using the blast furnace basic oxygen furnace route. Now here, the graph has to be read from the right to the left. So initially we see that as we move towards the left, the carbon emissions decrease, but also the cost reduce. This is primarily happening because low cost renewable electricity available at around 2.5, 2.6 rupees a unit replaces grid power, which is available at 7.6 rupees a unit. We reach a minimum threshold, which is a emission factor of about 0.9 tons of CO2 per ton of crude steel. But if we want to go beyond this emission factor, then just using renewable electricity is not enough. We have to start producing green hydrogen. And the percentage values that we see over here, they essentially indicate the share of green hydrogen in steel making unit here. So our conclusion is that today, with a 9% blend of green hydrogen, we are cost competitive with the upper range of blast furnace processes. The second observation is that by 2030, we can be competitive with the median or the average range of blast furnace cost for a green hydrogen blend of 60%. And finally, when the cost of various components across the hydrogen value chain decrease to 2040 level, then we do not need natural gas at all. So all we can do is produce 100% green hydrogen using renewable electricity and use certain amount of grid power to meet the auxiliary loads in the plant. But for such a transition to happen, it is very important that we start investing in hydrogen-ready technologies today. And therefore, one of the recommendations that we make is natural gas is essential bridge fuel if we have to realize the goal of a green hydrogen-based steel making 10 or 15 years down the line. Another important thing is, at 9% blend of green hydrogen, the capital investment is about $1 billion per MTPA, which is in ballpark of integrated steel plants. However, if we want to aim for a fossil-free steel making, which is very similar to the hybrid project, then we are looking at a capital investment of about $3 billion per MTPA. So roughly threefold jump between this point and this point. Finally, we should learn the hard lessons from the National Solar Mission and focus on domestic manufacturing of components across the hydrogen value chain. For example, if we look at the electrolyzer manufacturing and we consider two commercial technologies available today, the alkaline electrolyzer, we see that of the total stack cost, roughly 84% of the alkaline electrolyzers can be potentially indigenized. We are, of course, import dependent on critical minerals and membrane technologies which are used in alkaline electrolyzers. But for PEM electrolyzers, things change drastically. So for PEM electrolyzers, as of now, only 24% of the total cost of the stack can actually be indigenized. There's 30% cost contribution essentially coming from critical minerals like platinum and iridium that we do not have any reserves of. And the third aspect is access to a patented technology of Nefian membrane. So if we want to develop PEM electrolyzers in India, then we need our industries access to critical minerals and access to important technologies. Only then we can scale up PEM manufacturing in India. Now, our recommendation is that we should be technology agnostic, right? So alkaline electrolyzers, PEM electrolyzers, they have their own advantages and limitations. However, what should not happen is that we should not miss the manufacturing bus on electrolyzers and fuel cells the way we have done on solar manufacturing. Finally, today we are releasing two reports. The first is Greening Steel, moving to clean steel making using hydrogen and renewable energy. And the second report that we are releasing today is Case for a Green Hydrogen Alliance. With this, I would like to hand over the stage to our CEO, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yadav, for your crisp presentation. Honorable Union Minister of Power and New and Renewable Energy, Sri RK Singh ji. Honorable Minister of State for Chemical and Fertilizers and New and Renewable Energy, Shri Bhagwant Khubha ji. Honorable Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Shri Indu Shekhar Chaturvedi ji. Excellencies and distinguished speakers for today's session. Ladies and gentlemen, namaskar. I'm Arunabha Ghosh. I'm the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, and it gives me great pleasure and privilege to be partnering with, on behalf of CEEW, to be partnering with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy in hosting this very important discussion on a multilateral approach towards building the hydrogen economy. In my short opening comments, I only want to make 3 points. First, the energy transition is a development imperative. It is not just an environmental challenge, it is a development challenge that emerging economies and developing economies have to embrace. And countries like India are demonstrating how that can be done. How energy for hundreds of millions of people who have, even now across the world, no access to modern energy can be rapidly delivered. And at the same time, that energy can come from more and more clean sources. Therefore, the second point, India over the past few years has already been demonstrating what I call a double leapfrog. A leapfrog from lack of modern energy sources to connections for nearly every single household to electricity, as well as the access to clean cooking energy, and a leapfrog towards cleaner energy sources. Just a few weeks ago, we crossed more than 100,000 megawatts of renewable energy capacity, not counting large hydro. While that seems big, let us recognize the distance we've traveled. In 2010, we had less than 20 megawatts of solar. This is that transformational double leapfrog that holds a lesson, not just for India, but for many other countries across the world. And therefore, I come to my third brief point. What do we do next? Even as we decarbonize our power sector, even as we connect every household and every industry to an electricity connection, we know that as a growing economy, our energy demand will grow. We know that as growing economies in the developing world, energy demands will grow. And that energy demand will come not just from homes or from offices such as this, it'll come from heavy industry. It'll come from long distance transportation. And it's not easy to abate those emissions. And that is why we need a move towards cleaner and more disruptive technologies. And green hydrogen has the potential to be that game changer for heavy industry and long distance transport. As I look at what is happening across the world, and as my colleague Dr. Deepak Yadav showed, we estimate that at least 32 countries plus the European Union now have programs on hydrogen. At least 24 of them have programs of pilots or targets for green hydrogen. But if we look at where the primary investment is going, it is still concentrated primarily in developed countries. If we look at where the demand for green hydrogen will come from, it will be primarily from developing countries and particularly from Asia. So we need a bridge. We need a bridge between the development of technology and the deployment of technology. And if we could potentially form a global green hydrogen alliance, then we could accelerate the energy transition that many countries are already undergoing. We could pool our financial and technical resources. We could develop a multi-country, multi-institutional network to not just develop the technology, but test it out in the regions where the technology is most needed. We could develop common standards for safety and transportation so that trade barriers don't emerge. And of course, if we did all of that, we would demonstrate that to the world that genuine collaboration can be transformative for planet and prosperity. Those were my 3 simple points. And now it gives me great pleasure to first invite Shri Indu Shekhar Chaturvedi, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. Shri Chaturvedi is member of the Indian Administrative Services of the Jharkhand cadre. Prior to his current role, he served as Additional Chief Secretary and Additional Secretary, Department of Forests, Environment and Climate Change. And he has also served as Joint Secretary or equivalent in the Prime Minister's Office and in the Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance. Shri Chaturvedi, we welcome you and we request you now to deliver your special address.
Thank you very much. Honorable Minister for New and Renewable Energy, Mr. RK Singh. Honorable Minister of State for New and Renewable Energy, Mr. Bhagwant Khuba. His Excellency, Mr. Juan Angulo, Ambassador of Chile to India. Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, CEO of CEEW, distinguished participants. On behalf of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, I warmly welcome you to this webinar. As you know, this webinar is being organized toward fulfillment of India's role and responsibilities as the global theme champion on energy transition in the United Nations high-level dialogue on energy. And the global champions are tasked with raising awareness and inspiring commitments to formulate a global action plan for reaching SDG 7 by 2030. This webinar has representation from 5 other countries: Chile, Denmark, Germany, Italy, and the UK. We are happy that 4 of these countries, Chile, Denmark, Germany, and the UK, are also global champions on the same theme of energy transition, while Italy is a global champion on the theme finance and investment. Green hydrogen is globally seen as full of promise to help decarbonization efforts. It has the potential to enhance penetration of renewable energy in areas like long-range, heavy-duty transportation and shipping. It can also replace fossil fuel-based feedstocks in sectors like fertilizers, refining, and so on. It can be particularly useful as an energy carrier in remote areas. The past couple of years have seen growing interest in green hydrogen around the world, with several major economies putting in place strategies and action plans in this area. And this is something which has already been mentioned before. There is wide acceptance based on techno-economic trends that the use of green hydrogen would achieve cost competitiveness in about a decade or so in various segments of the economy. In India, the launch of a national hydrogen mission was announced by our Prime Minister on our Independence Day last month. The Ministry of New and Renewable Energy has been working to develop a comprehensive mission document with the aim of scaling up green hydrogen production and utilization across multiple sectors. The broad vision is to develop indigenous capabilities and lower costs to speed up adoption of green hydrogen in various areas of potential use. The mission would cover the key areas of creating demand and market instruments, developing indigenous manufacturing capacities, particularly in electrolyzers, establishing facilitative policy and regulatory frameworks, building production and supply infrastructure, and carrying out research and development for green hydrogen. The proposed strategy is likely to include creating initial demand for green hydrogen through suitable mandates for green hydrogen purchase obligations or consumption obligations in sectors like fertilizers and refining and natural gas networks, and simultaneously promoting indigenous manufacturing of electrolyzers. This will enable economies of scale, facilitate technology development, and accelerate cost reduction, thus paving the way for green hydrogen use in other sectors like long-haul transport and steel production, which we expect would be quite feasible to do by, say, 2030 or a year or two before that. Building a global hydrogen ecosystem would require strong coordination among various countries and other stakeholders. Different countries possess different strengths that could be useful for transitioning to decarbonization action based on the use of green hydrogen. Multilateral and bilateral collaborations would help in optimally leveraging these capabilities to the benefit of participating countries. Multilateral cooperation would also be necessary for harmonizing standards and regulations and establishing norms for future international trade of green hydrogen and its derivatives like green ammonia. India and the partner countries present here today are already collaborating under a number of multilateral initiatives on different aspects of hydrogen. These include the International Partnership on Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, Mission Innovation, and the Clean Energy Ministerial, and the various initiatives of IEA and IRENA. Today's dialogue would build on these existing collaboration efforts and look to propose a way forward for accelerating the global transition to affordable green hydrogen. I once again thank all participants for joining us today for this event and look forward to the insight and recommendations emerging out of the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shri Chaturvedi, for your very clear address on the homework before us today in this webinar and as we go forward. It is now my great honor to invite and introduce Sri RK Singh, Honorable Cabinet Minister for Power and New and Renewable Energy. Sri RK Singh is also a member of the Indian Parliament from Ara, Bihar, and he has been a member of the Indian Administrative Services when he was also Home Secretary of India. Sri RK Singh has been powering the energy transition in India, whether it is the connection to households for electricity, or it is the move towards such disruptive and new technologies such as green hydrogen. We are delighted to once again welcome Sri RK Singh ji on this platform related to the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy. Sri RK Singh, we now look forward to your comments and your guidance.
Thank you, Hon'ble. The Minister of State for New and Renewable Energy, His Excellency Mr. Bhagwant Khouba, and the Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Mr. Indu Shekhar Chaturvedi, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Gentlemen, it is true that we have been and we are at the forefront of an energy transition, the likes of which has not been seen anywhere else. The first problem which we tackled, of course, was the problem of access. We ensured universal access by adding about 28 million new consumers in a space of about 18 months. The International Energy Agency hailed it as the single biggest sort of expansion of access in such a short time frame, anytime across the world at any period of history. I mean, nothing has happened like this. But that happens because we are such a big country. We, of course, united the whole country into one grid. So that means that we united the country into one market. And that has brought about its own efficiencies. The prices have become competitive, more competitive. We've tackled the problem of the sufficiency of power, and we've transformed our country into a power surplus country. We are now exporting. In fact, for a brief period, it was a bit of a problem. We had so much of surplus that you had capacities which were getting stressed because of lack of demand. Now the situation has changed entirely, and whatever capacity is there is called upon to generate and supply power. And I believe that the demand will continue accelerating. In fact, we have our demand has been accelerating at a rapid pace over the past months. I've been seeing ever since we added these many consumers, the demand has been increasing. And we crossed 200 gigawatts. In fact, just at the time of COVID, we were just coming out of COVID, we crossed 200 gigawatts. And the future is going to be 200 gigawatts plus. So whatever capacity we added, we were patting ourselves on the back that now we are energy surplus. And now I'm worrying about adding more capacity. But let there be no sort of confusion. We'll make sure that sufficient capacity is there, because we will add capacity as per our requirements. We will grow. We are a growing economy, we are a growing country, so our energy demand will grow, and we'll add capacity. Preferably that capacity will be green. In fact, in this energy transition also, we have emerged as a world leader. We have one of the fastest rates of growth of renewable energy in the world. We had pledged that we will have 40% of our power generation capacity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. We are already at 38.5%. And by 2030, actually, we'll have not less than 50% of our power generation capacity coming from non-fossil fuel sources. Similarly, in the reduction of emissions, because of our different schemes for reducing the energy intensity of our capacities, we have already reduced the emissions intensity by 24%. This was the estimate in 19. And I think that we'll cross 33%, the target we had set in our NDCs by 2030. In fact, we'll be way beyond it. And basically we are not satisfied with what we are doing. As I said, we are one of the fastest growing. We are the most attractive market insofar as investments in renewables is concerned. The good news is that investors across the world are finding our country the most attractive destination for investments in renewables. That's because we've structured our bids in such a fashion and our rules and regulations in such a fashion. We've tried to make it as transparent as possible, and we've tried to put in place mechanisms which will resolve disputes as quickly as possible. We've tried to put in place mechanisms for payment security. So that's why, I mean, Bloomberg called us the most favored destination or the most attractive destination for renewables. That will continue. And the good thing is that, all this capacity expansion has been mostly by investments by the private sector, whether it is foreign investments, FDIs, or whether it is our domestic private sector. In fact, every pension fund is in the world, every pension fund in the world is invested here. And the investments are growing. They will grow because we are growing, and we have a transparent regime, open laws, etc. So, investments will keep coming. And therefore, the target of 450 gigawatts, which our Prime Minister has set for us, is also something which we shall achieve. I have absolutely no doubts about this. Renewable energy, we are already at, in fact, we celebrated crossing 100 gigawatts, but that was actually renewable energy minus hydro. It was mostly solar and wind. If you add hydro, we have crossed about 147 gigawatts already of established capacity, and we have another about 63 gigawatts under installation, which means that our renewable energy capacity, including hydro, is 203 gigawatts, which is not bad, But our pace will continue. Our pace of growth of renewable energy and our pace of renewable energy transition will continue. That's because our government believes in it. The Prime Minister believes in environment. Swachh Bharat was one example of that. This is another example of that. We believe that environment is something which we are trustees of. We have to leave behind a better environment for our children, our great-grandchildren, etc. So we shall continue on this path, despite the fact that our per capita emissions are one of the lowest in the world. Our per capita emissions are about one-third of the world average. And despite that, I'm talking about world average, which includes Africa and other countries like that. And we are one-third of that world average. There are countries 6 times whose per capita emissions are 6 times, 7 times, 8 times the world average. Mostly the developed countries. And whenever I have a conversation with my interlocutors from the developed countries, I tell them this, and I say that we look forward to your per capita emissions coming down to somewhere near the world average, and tell us how quickly you will come down to that. Because the time left is very limited. People are talking about net zero by 2050. Now, 2050 is way beyond time. It's way beyond time. If you talk about limiting the global rise in temperature to 2 degrees and less, then the available carbon space will get filled up by 2045. That's the time frame. If you are talking about 2 degrees, if you are talking about 1.5 degrees, the available carbon space becomes less and will get filled up by 2040. So if you come to net zero by 2050, I mean, thank you very much, but no thank you. I mean, it won't help the world. You will have to think of a closer time frame. You'll have to think about where will you be in per capita emission terms by 2030. I mean, that's the time frame we should be thinking about, because we don't have much time left. But as I said, we are carrying on regardless of what the rest of the world is doing. And we'll continue carrying on regardless, because we believe in environment independently of what other countries believe or do not believe. And hydrogen is another, sector which we are going to take up, and we are going to take it up on a large scale. And anything which we do has to be on a large scale, because on a small scale it doesn't work in India. So we had drawn up a cabinet note and we had sent it to the cabinet, for placing mandates for use of green hydrogen. We intend to come out with bids for green hydrogen. And those mandates totaled up to a requirement of 8.8 gigawatts, 8,800 megawatts of electrolyzer capacity was required for that. And the mandate was very modest. We started with 10% and going up to about 20-25% in the next 3-4 years. But it is because it was modest, therefore the Prime Minister felt that nice also we need to increase our ambition. So we are drawing up mandates which are stiffer. And the only problem is the availability of electrolyzer capacity. The total electrolyzer capacity in the world is just about 2,000 megawatts. That's it. And the installed electrolyzer capacity is just 200 megawatts. Now, for the first lot of mandate, even at 10%, and only the sectors which we are touching are only these, refining and fertilizer. And that adds up to 8.8 gigawatts, 8,800, requirement of 8,800 megawatts of electrolyzer capacity. So I told the Prime Minister in our meeting that by and large we'll have to, do this along with setting up electrolyzer capacity on a huge scale. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to come out with a PLI, that is production linked incentive scheme for setting up electrolyzer capacity. That electrolyzer capacity which we will need has to be at least in the region of the 15 gigawatts. If we want to actually do something, we can start with a capacity of 10,000 megawatts, that is 10 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. Without that, we are not going anywhere because the available electrolyzer capacity in the world is very limited. But we'll do both simultaneously. We'll add electrolyzer capacity and we'll add and we'll also conduct bids for green hydrogen. The thing is that again, these are on a scale which has not been seen anywhere else in the world, but doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We'll come out with bids for that in any case. I have told all my interlocutors from other countries that if you have any companies interested in electrolyzer manufacturing, point them towards us. This is where they'll get the market because we have the demand. We are creating the demand. Now, the mandate will result in a slight price increase of petroleum products, very slight, very marginal, and in the fertilizer, it will also be not really very much. It will be something which is bearable. And gradually we believe that the green hydrogen prices will come down so that it will become competitive with grey hydrogen. And then the mandate will not be required. The green hydrogen will stand on its own legs. You see, this is a step which we wanted to take earlier. In fact, in 2019 or 2018 it was, I think, I contacted the International Energy Agency and I told them that, look, I want to look at hydrogen. So if you have any expert on hydrogen, please send him across, let him give us a presentation. So we had an expert from IEA giving us a presentation in early 2019. And at that time he said that, hydrogen or green hydrogen is something which has been looked at as the most promising thing for the past, for a decade. But its time has still not come because it's still too expensive. The point is that, when we started solar, it was too expensive. But we believe that by adding volumes, the prices will come down. Similarly, now we are starting off on hydrogen, and we are starting off on scale, a huge scale, the likes of which has not been seen anywhere. And the prices will come down because we are adding scale. And scale will bring the prices down. That is our belief. And that is a belief which we are willing to put to the test. So you will see bids as soon as our cabinet note, our revised cabinet note is cleared. You will see this happening. Similarly, on battery storage. Now, as far as hydrogen is concerned, you see what my concern is as an Indian. Now, my concern is that I am dependent for energy. So my petroleum imports are huge because we are a huge country. I want to reduce that dependence on other countries for my energy requirements. And this green hydrogen is one of the paths for it. Electrification of all other sectors of the economy is another part of it. So our mantra has been that, electrify the economy and green the electricity. That's what it has been. But there are sectors where electrification of the economy itself will not work. I mean, in transport, take transport, for example. We started experimenting with hydrogen in transport a few years back. We had a scheme, we were encouraging research and development. We had some vehicles running on green hydrogen in our National Institute of Solar Energy. And we'll have more vehicles running on green hydrogen, heavy vehicles in Ladakh, then from Delhi to Jaipur, etc., Delhi to Agra. Bids have been issued for this. Battery, for example, will be good for two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, passenger cars. But battery will not be good for heavy transport, long-distance transport, because the size of the battery will be so much that it will not be very viable. So green hydrogen we see as an alternative for long-distance heavy transport, and that is another thing which will be starting. So we will probably have viability gap funding for starting on heavy mobility, long-distance mobility, because we see a future for green hydrogen there. We have also in our sights on steel. We have had discussions with the Ministry of Steel. The method, our current technology for making steel is something which does not actually lend itself to the hydrogen being used on a large scale. But by and large, the transition will take place. The Prime Minister has said that technology, co-coven technology, etc., should make way for arc furnace technology, and combined with green hydrogen. So basically, that is again something which we will be pioneering. Fertilizer, we are putting a mandate, but fertilizer will be coming out with bids for complete plants. So, for example, we'll come out with a bid for 1.25 million tons urea plant. Maybe we can come out with a bid for one urea plant or two urea plants. Currently, we import about 9 to 10 million tons of urea here. Now, instead of importing urea, we plan to make it from green hydrogen. So, our green hydrogen economy is going to actually boom. That is the future I see. And we want it to boom because, as I said, we want to reduce our dependence on imports for our energy requirements. That is something. And the other thing, of course, is this belief which our government has. And our government has this belief that we need to fix the environment. We need to heal the environment. And we'll do whatever it takes for us to heal the environment. So thank you. I look forward to your deliberations. There are, I heard some experts of the previous speakers. Now, there is a technology issue in many sectors. There is a technology issue insofar as hydrogen is concerned. We want those technology issues to be, addressed. We'll do that. For example, for long distance mobility, heavy duty long distance mobility. Again, there would be a technology issue. There is a technology issue for shipping. I have discussed this with the Minister of concerned, and I have told him to identify one or two ships which will convert to hydrogen ships, green hydrogen ships, on a trial basis, so that we start learning here as to how to modify the engines of these ships to handle green ammonia, run on green ammonia instead of the heavy diesel. So we are feeling our way on the technology front also, and that I believe is the only way which is possible, because it's not there anywhere else in the world. But we'll be the standard bearers, so to speak. We'll lead the way. I have no sort of hesitation in this, because unless and until we take the first step, you are never going to change. We are going to change. We'll change big time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sri RK Singh ji, for laying out the vision, the mission, and the action that is already underway. And we look forward to more announcements in the coming months as the policies unfold in the various subsectors that you. Moment to once again thank you, Shri Bhagwant Khubha ji and Shri Indu Shekhar Chaturvedi ji, for your presence during this plenary session. before we move on to the country discussions with the other partners of India in the who are championing the global energy transition. Once again, thank you and namaskar.
Thank you.
To all of you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard from the Honorable Minister and we have heard from the Honorable Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, of what India is doing. But as my colleague Shubha Raha outlined right at the outset, India is a global champion for the energy transition as part of the UN high-level dialogue on energy. And along with India, there are several other partner countries. We have great pleasure today in having 4 of those partner countries join us in the discussion. So therefore, let me start by welcoming the Honorable Ambassador, His Excellency Juan Angulo, the Ambassador of Chile to India, concurrent to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. Ambassador Angulo is a career diplomat and an economist. He has worked abroad at the embassies of Chile in Denmark and France, among others. In Chile, he has served as the Deputy Director of the Directorate of European Affairs. At the time of his nomination as Ambassador to India, he was also the Deputy Director, Directorate of Environment and Ocean Affairs, where he led the delegations of Chile to different meetings of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change at a technical level. Ambassador Angulo, we've been in discussion on issues of hydrogen and green hydrogen and the potential for collaboration between India and Chile. Once again, a very warm welcome to you, and we look forward to your initial remarks on Chile's plans in this regard. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Many thanks, Mr. Koch. Good afternoon to Honorable Minister Singh and Minister of State, Upadhyay, and Secretary Chaturvedi, and also to all the participants to this webinar. First of all, I would like to thank the Council of Energy, Environment and Water and his CEO for inviting me to speak about how we could build up a global hydrogen economy. I will concentrate in green hydrogen and what Chile is doing in this new industry. As the recent report of the IPCC shows, there is an urgency on taking real action against the negative effects on climate change. This seminar is very timely to discuss about how we could build a global green hydrogen economy, according to us, focus in one of the key elements to solve the problem. As India, Chile is one of the countries which is most at risk concerning climate change, since we fulfill almost all the criteria concerning vulnerability established in the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. Even if Chile has a limited impact at global level concerning emissions, we have a strong ambition to decarbonize our economy and to transform our power grid into a green one. Chile's carbon neutrality is committed to reach sustainable development and considers a goal of net zero emissions from 2050. In order to do so, one of the actions has been to the opening on regulations so that the use of non-conventional renewable energies as a source of electricity generation can be developed in the broadest way that the market allows. Chile is a country rich in renewable energies, with one of the most powerful solar radiation on the planet and consistent onshore winds that rival offshore potentials in other geographies. More than 1,800 gigawatts in renewable electricity generation potential has been mapped so far, which is more than 70 times our current installed power capacity of around 24 gigawatts. Our targets for 2020 was to have 20% of the total electrical energy generated in the country by means of non-conventional renewable energies. I'm very happy to inform you that we went beyond expectations and reached 22% of that total. The green hydrogen has, of course, a very important role in this process. All studies so far indicate that Chile has a clear potential to have one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, green hydrogen on the planet, reaching down to about $1.3 per kilo in production cost by 2030 and below $1 per cost in the long term. The estimated total potential is more than 160 million tons per year of green hydrogen. In the same line, we expect a domestic market of up to $9 billion per year by 2050, with up to 5 million tons of green hydrogen in use. Sectors like the transportation and mining. Chile is a very important actor in mining industry, among others, are the largest potentials for this use. Concerning exports of green hydrogen and its derivatives, we estimate a market up to $24 billion a year for 2050. Among the benefits of a very competitive green hydrogen cost is that it will allow us the production and exports of products that are created using zero carbon fuels, which can differentiate our exports as clean products for overseas users. How we project to reach these numbers? The first step was the creation of a national green hydrogen strategy, which is a long-term policy which comprises a roadmap for the development of the country's green hydrogen industry. And the aim is to place Chile among the world's leading producers of this renewable fuel by 2040. We are trying to implement this strategy, and we have three main objectives on that. The first is to produce the world's cheapest green hydrogen by 2030. The second is to be among the top 3 exporters by 2040. And the third is to have at least 5 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity under development by 2025. You have to consider that, of course, the size of the Chilean economy is not the same as the Indian economy. So for us, this is a very ambitious targets, but it is very clear. And the advantage is that we have clear objectives. The first wave of implementation of this green hydrogen strategy will focus on domestic applications and demand uptakes. In order to do so, the government will accelerate the deployment of green hydrogen in 6 prioritized applications to build local supply chains and mainly acquire experience and expertise. These applications are in very particular areas. One is oil refinery feedstocks, green ammonia, mining, haul trucks, heavy-duty on-road trucks, long-range buses, and blending into gas grids. The second wave of implementation will unlock international demand for exports, and the idea is to be concentrated in green ammonia, and later perhaps liquid hydrogen or other carriers, including e-fuels. We have identified early off-takers to be targeted in the sectors located in Western Europe, Eastern Asia, and the central coast, the west coast of the USA, where we think the demand is expected to be very high. In the medium term, we have some key targets. One very important that was mentioned by some of my predecessors is investment is very important, and we have our targets is to become a top destination of green hydrogen investments in Latin America, with around $5 billion committed in the short term. We think that would allow us to reach the target of 5 gigawatts in electrolysis capacity in operation by 2025, as I mentioned before. We have also the expectations to produce green hydrogen in at least 2 hydrogen valleys in the country. We have identified the north of the country of one of these valleys, where the solar radiation is very important, and we have identified one in the south in Patagonia, where the wind capacity is also very, very important. We have also the target to be one of the leaders in exports of green hydrogen and derivatives with $2.5 billion per year by 2030, and one of the top exporters by 2040. Some key steps in the short term for this, and we have already working very much on that, is to establish at least one international agreement for offtake to facilitate export-import of green hydrogen. I can inform in this area that, again, we are happy. That was the goal for this year, but we have signed already 2 MOUs, one with the Port of Rotterdam for the entrance into all the European market. That was signed in May. And we also signed, we're in conversation with the authorities of Singapore to have the same entrance into that part of the world. We're also targeting to give $50 million in direct funding for supporting large-scale green hydrogen production projects. There are more than 20 more than 40 projects currently in study in Chile for this industry. We have also tried to develop the first regulation for safety in the green hydrogen value chain, based, of course, in international standards. We are trying to define tributary and fiscal instruments to accelerate green hydrogen uptake, including, we are not sure, but including evaluating increasing carbon and fuel taxes. We are trying to draft a green hydrogen bill to set mandated quotas of green hydrogen blended in gas grids in the country. We are trying to generate public-private agreements with mining companies. Again, mining is a very important sector, for commitments on green hydrogen usage. We are trying also to establish a pilot for certification of origin for first exports of green hydrogen and derivatives using a validated scheme. We are trying to attract bilateral financing and development banking instruments to facilitate large-scale projects by consortiums. And one of our targets as well is to reduce regulatory barriers for the participation of green hydrogen in the power sector, including remote or very isolated areas. I haven't tried to give you a very quick view of what we are doing. Some are very concrete measures. We could say that we are quite optimistic about what we are doing so far. And as Honorable Minister mentioned, now it is very expensive, or could be very expensive. We think that one of the problems of the development of this industry is the gap between the price on current fuel products, energy based in current fuel products, fossil products, and the new industries. So we are confident in the development of this new industry in our country. We think that this is the key way to reach the goal of net zero emissions by 2050. And of course, in the same way, all steps aimed at creating a global hydrogen economy are, of course, of great interest to us, and we will participate. We are already participating in all these alliances, and we are looking forward for this global green hydrogen idea of coming all the stakeholders together for reaching this objective of improving our environment. So many thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Angulo, for outlining Chile's plans. And as is very evident from what you're saying, a lot of those domestic plans also depends on deeper integration with economies elsewhere. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation on a more multilateral approach towards building a global hydrogen economy. Another country that is a global champion for the energy transition is Denmark. So let me now introduce Ambassador Martin Strandgaard, the Deputy Head of Mission of the Royal Danish Embassy. Ambassador Strandgaard has been associated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark for more than 20 years in multiple capacities. He served as Deputy Head of the Department of Financial Affairs, Counselor Economy for the EU, Deputy Head of Department for Trade Policy, and Head of EU Climate and Energy Team, and so forth. His expertise includes economic affairs, trade policies, and trade relations. So you're the right person to reflect on Denmark's plans on building a hydrogen economy, but also on how, as I mentioned earlier, many European countries and the EU have plans on hydrogen. How does that link up with what is happening elsewhere in the world? Thank you very much for joining us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Koch. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about this important topic. I think we can all notice what's happening around us. We don't need the IPCC reports to understand what is at stake here and why we all need to engage in multiple areas, including of course, the multilateral cooperation, energy transition, and the green hydrogen. Now, I'll just, before going deeper into green hydrogen, allow me to tell a little bit about the state of affairs between Denmark and India, because we are now in a very deep and comprehensive partnership, in a green strategic partnership agreement that we entered into just last year, with cooperation in a wide range of areas, including the areas that is on the agenda of this important webinar, but also other green areas. there's a lot to do in the green transition of Denmark and the green transition of India and all of the countries. So cooperation is crucial. Now, another development from last year I'll mention, which is connected, is the Danish government created and launched a new strategy for global climate action. A key part of this strategy is exactly what we are doing with India. We would like to do it with other countries as well, having these green strategic partnerships where we direct the bilateral cooperation, the business-to-business contacts, and everything that we do to promote, we direct it in this direction of the green transition. Just a few highlights from the strategy. I won't go into every detail of it, just a few highlights. We have set the target of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by 2030 and to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Another part of the strategy is that we aim to do what we can to shift global financial flows into a green direction. What this means is our own development aid. We are shifting that into a much more substantial climate mitigation and adaptation. But we're also doing it in our trade promotion efforts. So part of what every country does, part of what embassies do, is helping the companies. So we make special efforts in promoting the availability of the solutions that we have in Denmark, including here in India to the Indian market. Now, the last thing that I would mention is that we have a huge energy island project on its way. It is the biggest infrastructure project in the history of my country for the total cost of 28 billion euros. It's a huge amount for our budgets, and we've never done something this big. It's just been decided this year in February by a broad majority. And what we aim to build is an island, an energy island in the middle of the North Sea. We will do it in a public-private partnership, and it will have an initial capacity of 3 gigawatts, which is enough to power the electricity consumption of 3 million people in our corner of the world. The capacity can be expanded to up to 10 gigawatts, equivalent of a consumption of 10 million people. And the tendering process will start next year. Target is to be finished by 2030. So we are very much into this agenda. We think it's extremely important. We have a wide political majority behind it. And we have both the Danish people and also companies who are into this. We are dedicated, and we are here to cooperate bilaterally, multilaterally. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Strandgaard, for outlining Denmark's plans. The energy island in the middle of the North Sea sounds particularly exciting, but also for the strategic cooperation that is underway between Denmark and India on a range of areas. Let us now turn to a third partner country, Germany. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Steffen Koch, who is the Minister and Head of the Economic and Globalization Department of the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in New Delhi. His diplomatic career has spanned more than 24 years across Europe, Asia, and South America. Prior to this present role, he served as the Head of Division for Economic Affairs in the German Embassy in Madrid. And before that, he was the Deputy Head of Mission and Counselor for Economic Affairs, the German Embassy in Singapore. Dr. Koch, once again, a warm welcome to you. Germany has been leading a lot of the research and investment in hydrogen and has been striking up bilateral alliances and relationships with several countries. We'd love to hear from you what India and Germany and other countries represented here could be doing together. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Koch, for this very kind introduction, and warm welcome to all speakers and participants. Now, as it once again has turned out throughout this meeting, green hydrogen is the new keyword in the world of climate and energy, and for good reason, because green hydrogen is one of the main pillars of global energy transition. So I was particularly delighted to hear 3 weeks ago, just after arrival, and in fact on my first day in Delhi, the speech of His Excellency Honorable Prime Minister Modi on the 75th Independence Day. His words on green hydrogen and the launch of the National Hydrogen Mission are visionary. India is set to become a global hub for green hydrogen production and export. Likewise, in Germany, we have launched our national hydrogen strategy on the 10th of June 2020, which also draws on the 2018 European Hydrogen Initiative by the European Union and her 27 member states. And indeed, Europe has the technological potential to become a major actor on green hydrogen. However, unlike India, Europe has abundant sunlight only in the southern part of the continent, and therefore not the precondition to become a large-scale exporter of green hydrogen. Although we, meaning the EU and Germany, already have a wide and successful portfolio on renewable energy like solar, wind, water, and biomass, we are most likely to be an importer of green hydrogen. While India, with its cheap solar energy and its high-quality technology and high-quality workforce, may be able to produce green hydrogen at competitive prices. The key pillars of the German hydrogen strategy are, firstly, green hydrogen is considered one of the key elements of energy transition, the so-called Energiewende, in order to become greenhouse gas neutral and to meet the obligations under the Paris Agreement. We all know that time is not on our side. Extreme weather events all over the world, including India and very recently Germany, show the pressing need to act rather yesterday than tomorrow. Secondly, Germany seeks to promote its rapid market rollout and establish the necessary value chains. Also, we established the target of 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity until 2030 and 10 gigawatts until 2040. Thirdly, and here we come to the third pillar of our national strategy, that is about international cooperation. While the German government provides a total of 9 billion euros for the implementation of this strategy, 2 billion of this amount, 2 billion euros, are foreseen for international cooperation. And there are more funds under our National Innovation Program in Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technology and within our Energy and Climate Fund. Now, with these 2 billion euros in international cooperation, we once again recognize our responsibility to reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally. Thus, our national hydrogen strategy intends to strengthen German companies and their competitiveness by promoting research and development, but is also the basis for private sector investment. While currently green hydrogen is still expensive, India does already prove that solar can be the cheapest of all energy resources. It is just a matter of time that on an international scale, we can produce competitive green hydrogen. And Germany wants to make hydrogen a competitive option for industrial production as well. In the medium to long term, Germany plans to import substantial quantities of hydrogen. We share the interest in the establishment of a hydrogen market. International trade in hydrogen will have significant industrial and geopolitical implications, which needs already strategic plans. Therefore, the German government welcomes the high interest of the Indian government in a possible cooperation with Germany on green hydrogen. We need to discuss this as soon as possible. India and Germany have already several projects in the area of new and renewable energy, energy efficiency, and mitigation of greenhouse gas. While we are pursuing these efforts, the international community has to stand together and do its best to ensure that we meet the target of the Paris Agreement. We have recently raised our ambitions and want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 65% until 2030 in comparison to the 1990 level, and become climate neutral already by 2045. We applaud India for its ambitions regarding its climate target of 450 gigawatt renewable capacity by 2030, and with all due respect, we would recommend weaving it into the framework of the Paris Agreement in order to make Glasgow a success. And well, once again, green hydrogen is a key element in that road, which we should do together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koch, again for outlining Germany's strategy, but also very importantly, that third pillar of international cooperation and the other point you made about supply chains, because as we look at deploying, not just developing the technology, but deploying the technology, the demand might be somewhere else, the production might be somewhere else, and making sure that we have clear, consistent rules for an energy secure green hydrogen supply chain would be something that would be of benefit to all the countries involved. Let me now welcome our representative from the United Kingdom, Ms. Natalie Toms. She's the Economic, Climate and Development Counselor at the British High Commission here in New Delhi. In her role, she is responsible for the British government's engagements on economic, financial, energy, and climate issues in India, with a focus, again, on creating partnerships between the two countries. Prior to this role, Ms. Toms worked for Her Majesty's Treasury and has extensive experience in economic and fiscal policy. Ms. Toms, a very warm welcome to you, and over to you to listen to the UK government's plans on hydrogen, but also, of course, a critical role that you're playing in the lead up to COP26.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Koch, and thank you to MNRE, CEEW and the UN for inviting us as the UK to share our perspective in this really important conversation. Action on climate change is at the centre of the UK-India partnership. Our two prime ministers signed a new comprehensive strategic partnership in May, and this was one of the 5 pillars of action. And we're really looking forward to taking forward that partnership, both through the COP26 summit at the end of the year, but further beyond that into 2030 and beyond. And central to that pillar is an agreement to cooperate together on low carbon hydrogen. So I'm particularly delighted to be here today. As Dr. Koch has said, it was wonderful to hear Prime Minister Modi's vision for green hydrogen during his speech at the Red Fort on 15th of August. It's also been really exciting to hear all of the announcements from Indian business on this subject in recent months, alongside all of the incredibly impressive progress towards the 450 gigawatt renewables target, which we've heard about from the Honourable Minister today. But where does the UK stand? Well, the UK has already made significant progress in its energy transition. We've reduced emissions by over 40% while growing the economy by more than 70% since 1990. But we recognise that we have much, much further to go. And we now have a target to reduce emissions by 78% by 2035 on the way to our legally binding net zero by 2050 goal. And hydrogen will be really central to this, as was set out in the UK's hydrogen strategy, published only a couple of weeks ago. Hydrogen, as others have said, is one of a handful of new low carbon solutions, which will be crucial for the deep decarbonisation of the UK economy, as for other economies around the world, with a particular focus on the hard to electrify industrial sectors, and we're providing greener, flexible energy across the power, heat and transport, including shipping and aviation. So for that reason, our strategy has set a target of 5 gigawatts of hydrogen by 2030. How are we planning to do this? Well, first, I think we recognise that the cost gap is currently the major barrier for industry. So we set out a business model to incentivise the production and use of low carbon hydrogen. This will stimulate private investment in new production of low carbon hydrogen. We've also put £240 million into a net zero hydrogen fund to support the capital cost of development and construction of low carbon hydrogen production projects. And we've committed another £100 million of new funding to incentivise the production and use of low carbon hydrogen. So this is obviously very important work domestically, but our strategy also recognises the importance of international collaboration, especially given our role as the hosts of the COP26 summit in a couple of months now in Glasgow, a summit which we think is going to be one of the best chances to keep global warming to below 1.5 degrees. As others have said, hydrogen is a really important part of that kind of transition and that picture. It's an emerging technology, and it's therefore crucial that we collaborate together as it develops. It's been so interesting hearing today from the other panelists. We're all facing kind of similar issues and looking at similar challenges, which makes it so important for us to be sharing knowledge as this develops, but also looking to see how we can set consistent international standards and kind of regulatory approaches. And we're already working through a number of international bodies on this, including Mission Innovation and the Clean Energy Ministerial. And we're using our 2021 presidency of the G7 as well as the co-presidency of Koch to advance these international efforts. So yes, in summary, we're really looking forward, thank you for hosting today. We're really looking forward to developing our collaboration with India, both bilaterally and through multilateral initiatives.
Thank you again, Ms. Toms. And we have exactly 11 minutes between the four of you. So I'm going to use this opportunity to ask each of you a few questions to just build on the very rich points all of you have made. Let me go now slightly in a reverse order and start with you, Ms. Toms. As you concluded, you were mentioning the role that the UK is playing, both as the COP26 presidency, the G7 presidency, and building on that multilateralism and the initiatives that already exist. Now, as you saw from earlier the session, at CEEW, we've analyzed what every country in the world is doing on hydrogen or green hydrogen. And we believe that the best way to accelerate this transition is creating a bigger multilateral platform, not as a sort of large international bureaucracy, but as something much more nimble but action-oriented to bring countries together in a global hydrogen alliance. What would be your reflections on using multilateral platforms to essentially speed up what each of our countries has been trying to do individually?
Thanks, and I'd agree completely. I think that we should be using multilateral platforms in this way. As I said earlier, I think in particular we need to look at how we can share the outcomes of research, but also develop kind of new standards and look at kind of policy and regulation. There's already a few areas in which there is multilateral collaboration going on. So as well as through this dialogue, there's Mission Innovation, there's the Clean Energy Ministerial, and the kind of International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells. But I think that together we can go further, and we can do more to kind of strengthen the alignment of these individual strands of international collaboration and kind of seeking to develop a globally coordinated push-pull strategy to drive the development and deployment of low carbon hydrogen. And I think that's what we'll hopefully be seeking to do through both our kind of G7 presidency, which India is attending this year, and the co-presidency of COP. I mean, I think at COP, I think we'll be hoping to bring together public and private actors who recognise the crucial role that hydrogen can play in tackling emissions and unleashing clean growth. And we'll be looking to facilitate greater coordination and progress across innovation, deployment and policy. This should involve developed countries, public and private sector initiatives, kind of sending a really clear signal about hydrogen's place in the future global energy mix, and really welcome the proposal of CEEW and the event today. And I think we should carry on this conversation in that context.
Thank you very much, Ms. Toms. Dr. Koch, let me turn to you. As I also pointed out, you clearly mentioned that 2 billion of the 9 billion euros being deployed for international cooperation. And at least in my own research, I see Germany striking these bilateral partnerships with many countries in the world. So my question to you is, how do we take these kind of strands of bilateral partnerships, and of course Germany's strength in technological strength in this area, to a more sort of broader platform? You know, in what way would Germany be leveraging these individual partnerships to more broadly promote green hydrogen across the developing world? Because that's where the maximum demand for this technology will come from these growing economies. So some reflections from you on this matter would be great.
Well, we fully share, of course, the approach already outlined by our British colleague, that the multilateral arena is certainly also the place to go in developing the cooperation on hydrogen in general and green hydrogen in particular. While we have started our efforts for international cooperation on the bilateral arena, and indeed we have projects, for instance, with Chile, with Morocco, Brazil, South Africa, and I'm very keen also in collaborating with India on a bilateral basis. The knowledge acquired in these collaborations is certainly not something which should then be, kept under lock and key among the involved countries in these bilateral formats. But in order to win the race against climate change, we have to team up, and certainly not only in bilateral format, but we have to bring that knowledge and those results together so that the results can be shared. Because what we do need is, well, specifically in the field of green hydrogen, to bring prices down as soon as possible. So that makes it evident that we have to work together also on the multilateral field and team up.
Thank you, Dr. Koch. Ambassador Strandgaard, if I may now turn to you. As I look at Denmark, in addition to a lot of what you said, we see that there is this hydrogen valley that Denmark has been thinking about, of this hydrogen mobility flagship projects that is launching. And again, if I reflect on this issue of where the investment is currently going, or where the technologies are currently developing, primarily in the developed world, and where the demand will be primarily in the developing world, could you give your reflections on how we can spread the technology faster? I think the point is very evident that all the countries represented here, and many more, all have their national programs. But we have two choices: organically let this technology evolve, or accelerate it by pooling our resources, financial, technical, markets, and so forth. So some reflection from you on Denmark's approach towards speeding up the transition towards green hydrogen would be very, very beneficial.
Thank you for this question. I will make 3 points in this regard. First point being that it's critical to share knowledge, but not only knowledge, but also experience. So we are here in a relatively new area. We are building it up. We have yet to do on a large societal scale to find out how this is working and how we can do it. But obviously, green hydrogen is very much possible to be constructed now on a smaller scale, also in relation with green ammonia. Now, I think the second, so there was sharing knowledge, sharing experience. The second point being what I was alluding to in the beginning about our strategy. We have to look at redirecting financial flows. Because financial flows going more into the direction of the green area, this is crucial. If we are going to have technology transfer, if we're going to have this area also in growing in developing economies. Now, this requires political decisions on the part of some governments, but it also requires decisions about enabling environments, about risk mitigating tools. So this is all over the place. That thoughts are already being done about how can we speed up the financial flows. This is a crucial area that we are also looking at more and more intensively. The final point I would make is that just alluding to Honorable Minister RK Singh's remarks about upcoming reforms here about the electricity grid, which obviously is part of the same equation. It has to be possible. You have to make these infrastructure investments possible, and this is happening in India. It needs to happen elsewhere too. So it's a complicated picture. It involves engagement from all sides. I think that would be my answer to your question.
Thank you. And those are three very, very clear ways forward. So that brings me finally to you, Ambassador Angulo. You know, Ms. Toms used a very interesting phrase, the push and the pull to develop the hydrogen economy. And as I reflect on what you said about Chile's plans, as a relatively smaller economy, the market is actually more outside of your economy. And at least I personally believe that that aggregation of the demand across the economies through a multilateral platform actually enables that faster deployment of those technologies. So my question to you is, as Chile is developing its national strategies, you outlined very clearly your plans to export. What needs to happen to create those broader export markets, to create that demand pull? And would that multilateral route be the way to go, or should we go one by one in a bilateral fashion?
I think that the problem we face is a common problem, and so we need to find a common solution and work together solution. If every country will start doing the best they can do by themselves, that will not be the solution of the problem. We have to work together, and we congratulate all the initiatives of multilateral platforms in which we can talk and discuss about how to create the new industry which is need to be created. We are in the stage of 120 years ago when the fossil fuel industry, the petrol industry was created. This is a new industry, green hydrogen, and we need to discuss and to put together the interests of many stakeholders. One of the best, the only way to create alliances that will work is that to align interests of different stakeholders. Interests from the developing world are not the same of the interests of the developed world in terms of financing, in terms of in research, in terms of use. From our point of view, the particular interest of sharing and participating in a broader alliance would be the facilitation of established common standards, common rules, create what you mentioned, the demand for this green hydrogen. It is the only way of permitting economies to be decarbonized in the 2040, 2050, 2060. I don't know, but at least we have a possibility of obtaining energy in a way that we cannot harm the environment, and also in a renewable way. So we are. Our bet is to be one key player on this, and we have been working, as my colleagues mentioned, we are now currently the presidency of the COP25, and we are working with the UK for COP26 on this area. We had just hosted the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation in May last year, and we participated very actively in all this. We think that the collaboration is a key issue in putting together everybody in the same cart to solve this problem.
Thank you, Ambassador Angulo. A lot of what all of you have said, at least I, as an analyst, it's like writing an exam paper and just hoping that the examiners like your answers. So a lot of what you have said resonate with the analysis we have done about, for instance, what Ambassador Strandgaard was saying about the financing to also mitigate the risks in this emerging technologies, or the aggregation of demand, or to set the common standards. These are all things by which the players that actually invest and develop these technologies would find a clearer pathway, less transaction cost, more long-term outlooks about where the technology might go. So Ambassador Angulo, Ambassador Strandgaard, Dr. Koch, and Ms. Toms, thank you so much for sharing your country's perspectives, but also your vision for what we can all do together. Let me now turn to my senior colleague, Mr. Karthik Ganeshan, the Director for Research Coordination at CEEW, who will now lead the corporate conversation, the people, as I said, who put their money where our mouths are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Arnab. Can I request, I think, yes, everyone has their cameras on. I think Frank, Alka, and I also see Davide has his camera on. Thank you, everyone, for patiently being with us as we heard some of our government officials, and key representatives of the various governments internationally speak about their plans. I think now is, so we sort of walk the talk here in this conversation, because, in between the three of you, represent, of course, entities that have, massive aspirations when it comes to actually laying the groundwork for making hydrogen a reality. So before we get into the discussion, let me quickly introduce some of our panelists here. We have with us a very eminent panel here. Let me start with Frank first. Frank is the Senior Vice President, Energy Transition, very aptly at Reliance Industries. He's an early starter in the hydrogen space, and he helped draft North Africa Europe Hydrogen Manifesto in 2019, which is now being integrated into the the European Green Deal through this 2x40 gigawatt electrolyzer initiative. And he's also the head of the MENA Hydrogen Alliance since 2020. Frank, thank you so much for joining us. A lot of questions definitely awaiting you, as a representative of one of India's largest companies in the industrial space. We have with us Alka Upadhyay, who works as an assistant president at the Tata Sustainability Group, which is a group company, and she helps advise on climate change sustainability across the various group companies over the last 7 years. She is an engineer by training, a metallurgist, and is responsible for many of the improvements that we've seen in in the steel making process at Tata Steel in our early days. Thank you, Alka, for joining us, and for the phenomenal leadership that you show. And finally, we have Davide Cirelli, who is the country manager and the CEO of Snam India. For those of you in the audience who are not familiar with Snam, it's obviously an overseas entity. They're one of the largest infrastructure operators in Italy and one of Italy's largest listed companies. They have a portfolio of works, but most importantly, they're partners with Adani Gas here in India to actually help improve, the access to natural gas across the Indian landscape. And Davide is, has a decade of experience in energy, oil, and gas, with the various, energy biggies, Total Energies at ENI and at TSGI in Turkey. Davide, for joining us and being part of this conversation. So let's get quickly, into the discussion. And Frank, I'll begin the conversation with you. The discussion around hydrogen is not new, right? Everybody calls it the second wind for hydrogen. I think the last time it was talked up, it didn't really sort of live up to its promise. Perhaps it was ahead of its time. And it's been in use in an industry for decades, right? And specifically in refining in the case of Reliance. Why is there a sudden sort of buzz about it this time around that makes it feel different? What do you think has changed sort of to enable us to get us here from an industry perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the simple answer is that what we have now, which is something that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago, is very low cost and competitive renewable electricity. I think that's the first and foremost factor. So we're looking at a business case that starts to make sense in many, many applications. And that wasn't the case a while back. So although there was a hype 10, 15 years ago, many people invested a lot of money in technologies, etc. Right now, we're very close to solid business cases because of the cost decline of particularly renewable electricity. Now, the other factor is that due to the massive increase in the share of variable renewable electricity in many systems, we're also approaching certain targets in terms of how the electricity system works. And, we need elements of stability, we need elements of dispatchable supply, we need to transport energy over longer distances, we need to store energy. And to many of those things, hydrogen is actually a very sensible answer. And, I think those two elements, the growth of renewables, which require, other things than just pure electricity, and hydrogen is one of those things. And the fact that it's now cost competitive, or at least cost competitive soon in many applications, those are the two things that I think contribute to the fact that it's now a real option.
Right. Alka, I'll kind of pose a very similar question to you. So in the Indian context, right, we've had significant interest, of course, being shown by a lot of Indian industry. The chairman of Reliance, for instance, has given us a vision of getting to $1, for instance, right, by the end of this decade. But from a decarbonization perspective, and from this portfolio of options that you've really seen, right? That the various group companies that Tata's have, right? Where does sort of hydrogen, really sit right now? My colleague Deepak, of course, showcased very clearly where gray hydrogen stands. Sourced from gas. We have many pathways to clean up the industrial sector. Whether it's criteria pollutants or GHGs, right? So in that, notwithstanding the analysis that Deepak has shown us, where do you think the hydrogen stands, and what is your sort of priority order for how it will roll out?
Thanks, Karthik. Thanks for asking this question. So let me take a global view. So when we look into various options done by IEA or Energy Transition Commission work, we find that hydrogen will be occupying almost 15 to 20% of the primary energy by 2050 if we have to meet the 1.5 degree target. So it's going to be a very, very important role. When I look at the Tata Group, we are in all the sectors which was talked about in previous plenary sessions. We are in steel, we are in hard-to-abate sector like steel, heavy trucking, commercial vehicles. We have JVs in the shipping area. We are in airlines. So for us, the way we have been looking into decarbonization pathways are actually bucketed into 3 categories, 3 horizons. And the first one is the immediate what you can do, which is largely around resource efficiency and switching to renewable source of energy to the extent possible, let's say electricity. And I don't want to go into rhetoric of targets, and I'm just talking about the broad actions. But while we are doing this, we are also investing and experimenting in deep decarbonization technologies important for the companies I talked about. And when I step back, I will say there are 5 or 6 definitely crucial technology we will be definitely embracing going forward. Of course, the renewable, because we happen to be in utility sector, along with the storage, both daily storage as well as the seasonal storage, and hydrogen plays an important role in seasonal storage as well. We will be looking very closely into green hydrogen because it is a very, very strong decarbonizing source or levers for sector like steel. We will be looking very closely to take care of the residual emission, which we can't be removed through these deep decarbonization. So we are also flirting with carbon capture utilization and sequestration. Utilization more so in a small amount. And last one is, of course, wherever there is an opportunity to electrify, the way people have talked about any industrial processes which can be electrified from whatever it is using today, propane or byproduct gases, to electricity, which is by renewable power. So in my view, and I heard your colleague, I have a different, I don't know, I have not studied it much closely, but let me tell you what we are finding in steel industry. And I'm not speaking on behalf of steel, Tata Steel, but more as on my personal view. We are 100 million ton per annum of steel capacity today, and we want to grow to 3x, 300 in next 10 years by 2030. In this 100 million ton, major chunk is blast furnace and BOF tech, which will ask for a deep, deep nudge to transition from where it is to avoid the stranded asset to what is required in terms of hydrogen, DRI plus electric arc furnace. Correct. So what is required is just not the differential cost of making gray hydrogen, meet the requirement of gray hydrogen cost and the green hydrogen, but also this cost of transition of the whole asset base. How do you take care? And our asset life, in any typical steel industry, it's 100 years. You can continue relining and it is there fresh. So I'll pause over here for listening to the other panel. But hard to abate sector, as was pointed out, will need some level of incentive and nudging in terms of definite policy levers.
Right, absolutely. I mean, and I think, of course, just to sort of speak on behalf of Deepak, this certainly does not factor in the stranded asset costs, right? Our idea is, of course, that eventually, if new capacity is going to be added today, in the millions of tons, in the tens of millions of tons through BOF, then, we'll have to figure out a way of retrofitting, to maybe involve some bit of gas, but obviously we know that the technology does not work off, gas-based production at all. So clearly, that's a gap in the analysis, but we also need to ensure that we're not locking ourselves further in.
Yep.
Right. So that, of course, is an important message that comes from Deepak's study, right? That we can't rely in any case, we don't have the resources to be able to rely on coke, which is anyway imported, which is a precious commodity for us. And if we are truly sort of speaking to what Mr. RK Singh was saying, right? Perhaps there is some benefit in looking at, stomaching some of that, stranded acid, and then maybe moving on.
No, Karthik, let me say there are ways to do it. Even in the existing configuration of BF, you use what is called energy, hydrogen-rich injection through TUA, but there is a cap. So I'll pause here because I don't want to sort of
absolutely. We don't want to get too deep into the two tech. Absolutely,
that's true.
Davide, thank you so much, for joining us. The question that I have for you is this: you guys obviously have a portfolio across different energy sectors, and you've you have a big interest in the pipeline industry, right? Which is key for transportation of hydrogen eventually. So given that that we are seeing complementary pathways, right, to a decarbonization of industry. There's we heard what Alka mentioned, right? Electrification is part of it. Biofuels is also there. Right, and your experience from where Europe is currently seeing the role for hydrogen, and how are they sort of looking at how much will come through hydrogen? Because we see in 2018 the IEA called for electrification of everything, right? And 3 years later, of course, they're also singing the tune that everybody else is, which is of hydrogen, right? So to what extent can electrification sort of do the trick, and where do you sort of see hydrogen coming in from your customer base and the industries that you're involved in?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. And well, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Allow me just 30 seconds to give a bit of background on Snam, because as you were saying, people don't actually tend to know it in India. However, we are the second largest gas infrastructure player in the world, and particularly we have more than 42,000 kilometers of high pressure pipelines, which make us probably the leading player. We are the second largest TSO in the world, and we have a number of initiatives in regasification, underground gas storage, and other types of initiatives in the gas sector. When it comes to energy transition, we are active in global sustainable mobility, generation of green gases such as biomethane and biogas, and obviously hydrogen, green hydrogen in particular. Now, given the fact that we have more than 42,000 kilometers of high pressure pipelines under management and ownership, that was our natural entry point to understand the potential of green hydrogen. As you were saying, one of the key challenges is how to link generating areas where it makes economic sense to generate green hydrogen with potential off-takers, which are not necessarily one next to the other. Now, one thing that can be done is try to understand how to use existing infrastructures, or how to make sure that existing infrastructure can start accommodating a transportation of a certain percentage of hydrogen, or in the future, even full capacity of hydrogen, so that you need to start reducing the cost and the capex, which is linked to transporting the molecule and reaching the final customers. So for this reason, we've been starting blending green hydrogen with natural gas in our pipelines to transport it from regions where it makes economic sense to generate it to final off-takers. That is a great potential that you have in India. And therefore, it is certainly something that we are basically putting a lot of advocacy for the futures, also because right now you're doubling your transmission grid, which is a perfect occasion to make sure that the new grid that is going to be implemented will be hydrogen ready. So that's very important for us. Now, obviously, in the future energy mix will be primarily green if we have a long-term approach. Now, the cake, let's say it's huge. So there is room for multiple sources of renewable energies to play a very important role. However, it is pretty obvious that there are some sectors in which hydrogen will be playing a pivotal role or a leading role. And those are very simple. The sectors such as the one that we were mentioning before, steel factories, cement factories, refineries, glass and ceramic industries. Those are the first one where basically green hydrogen will be able to play a massive role in the decarbonization process. There are others as well, which is obviously mobility, particular when we talk about heavy duty vehicles, mining sites, etc., etc. But there is room for several different renewable sources of energy in the future energy mix. Hydrogen will be playing a major one. However, green gases, green electricity, etc., will also have a role in the future. That's obvious.
Right. The question that enters my mind, my research primarily actually is in the power sector, and I find, even in the case of power, right, where there is so much more sort of advancement in the way we're thinking about renewable energy integration, into the grid, there is a paucity of studies, in the Indian context, I think, of the nitty-gritty of how exactly things will pan out, right? We don't have stuff at the resolution that we see in the West. And in the case of industrial energy use, that is even less so, right? I'm actually, while the minister has obviously, expressed his interest at, the kind of ambition that we have seen, right? I've not seen, right, a solid study, right, coming out of, whether it's whether it's from industry or whether it's from the policy, research institutions focusing on India, right, that actually talks about what the scale of potential is for different technologies, right? While we understand, in principle, of course, the pie is large, right? Without detailing what exactly that nature of the pie is, right? It's going to be hard for us. So, in that, keeping that in mind, right? The fact that, I think that assessment is not there, but, it seems like the ambition has been set because, obviously, we've come to a point where decarbonization is needed yesterday, and hydrogen seems to be like that, silver bullet, for want of a better word, that will get us there. So, Alka, in that context, I had a question for you, which is, we've been speaking to Indian industry now for at least the last 4 years, right? Ever since, in 2018, we had a session. I remember we had reps from Tata Steel as well, convened in that. And, ultimately it comes down to this, right? As a developing country, industrial house, right? Margins are important, right? Environmental compliance, of course, is important, right? GHG comes after, right? Margins are important, which means costs are important. So at what point, right, do we think that, hydrogen would really start pushing the boundaries and saying, what, it starts making sense for me at this rate? Because what is not clear, I think, to the audience out there is, is coal really going to outcompete, hydrogen at every location, given that it's not really that cheap, right? And that there are inefficiencies that coal actually brings with it. So do you have a sense of, is there a price point that you think that will be a sweet spot that will work for Tatas? You don't need to speak for Tatas, but the industry as a whole, because ultimately we know that is going to be the reason why this will work or not work.
Karthik, you are asking me a question which I believe is sort of, saying something which I don't understand. But let me take an example from the sector which I can cite to convey a point. For existing use sectors like refinery, and we are talking about ammonia for fertilizer. It's a switching cost of what they are using as a hydrogen, which is sourced from fossil based to green. It's very simple to find out what will be the switching cost difference like, and you can provide, you incentivize that as perhaps to encourage the uptake. So this is very easy to say, and there is this numbers floating around, and you will have access to all those numbers. That today it is around steam reforming of the methane is around, so once it comes down to $1.5 to $2 per kg of hydrogen, it becomes viable for these type of existing use sectors. I'm very carefully using the word. But when we start looking for other sectors where hydrogen can play a role as a feedstock or a fuel, it's not this simple, because there what we are trying to see is you are trying to see the technology readiness of the sector, readiness of the network and infrastructure, and any other enabling elements which exist. All this calculation needs to be taken into consideration to help to answer your question. So let me give you a ballpark number for the steel sector. What does it mean? If I'm a blast furnace and basic oxygen furnace configuration, and I want to switch to hydrogen-based DRI, direct reduced iron, and electric arc furnace, I need to at least have a close to 130 to 140. This is my back of the envelope calculation. 130 to 140 US$ per ton of CO2 as a carbon price to nudge, which means this is a marginal abatement cost I'm talking about, which means this much of artificial price will justify my movement from existing traditional technology to this technology. What does it mean in terms of cost to the final customer? Just multiply it by 2, because traditionally BF-BOF generates 2 tons of CO2 per ton of crude steel. So 130, 135 into 2, that much is the increment increase in the cost of steel. Will your customer can you pass it to your end customer? That is the question. That is one way. I don't think so, because everyone would like to have their viability, and close to $300 increase in the per ton of crude steel is too much. Will it be absorbed by government, or will it be taken care by some policy, like carbon price coming into picture, a global picture? I'm not talking of national, because steel is a commodity. It needs to be, whatever needs to be done in terms of carbon price has to be at a global arena level. So I just cited this to convey that it's difficult for me to give you a number when this will become attractive. So my sense is, for the steel sector, anywhere close to $130 per ton of CO2 is an artificial price you'll be required to nudge the whole industry towards hydrogen-based DRI and EF. But you can always, there is always a transition solution where you can use a hydrogen-rich gas at the tour to some extent, which is a bridge solution between this and the other extreme.
Sure. Thank you, Alka, for I think clarifying to our audience with regard to the dilemma that the steel industry faces, and and I think you've laid it pretty clear there. Frank, you've got your task cut out, because your chairman's made a sort of very aggressive pitch to the rest of the world, saying we will get it down to the rates that we talked about. Obviously, that's going to come because Reliance as a company is presumably going to drive impact in all aspects of the value chain, which probably also means that electrolyzer manufacturing is also going to be sort of part of it. And we saw, my colleague Deepak presenting, the two sort of pictures there for both the alkaline and as well as the PEM electrolyzers and the mineral requirement, right? And and in the previous session, we really heard about what the role for inter-country partnerships is, really in ensuring that these minerals and materials are available, right, to India. And we know that this is a game that's played on a different table, right? Even I think large corporations like Reliance will have to rely on what governments can do, right, to enable this to happen. So where do you see sort of India's is there a weak point for us when it comes to our reliance on critical materials, for instance, in the manufacture of these? And how do you see well, not necessarily Reliance, India tackling this dependence on the outside world for materials and some of the tech?
Yeah, I mean, of course, where you get your materials from is a consideration, but we also have to realize that there is various different technologies with different requirements for some of these more exotic materials that are in relatively short supply. So there is a number of things to consider. First of all, you can choose a pathway that doesn't rely heavily on exotic catalysts with iridium, palladium, and all of those things, because that is not per se necessary. Of course, it increases efficiency, and that's why they are there. But there is alternatives to that. So in that sense, that is in the end, it's a business decision. What is your view on where that is going to go? But also realizing that the demand for these exotic materials, if you choose a pathway that meets them, can still further be reduced. I mean, there's a lot of work. Many people are looking into that, optimizing catalysts, potentially even doing away with catalysts, etc. So yes, it's a consideration, but and it's particular for India because some of those materials are not here, but that's the same for Germany. Or other countries that also would have to import some of these materials. Now, in terms of overall cost, what we're seeing with technologies like electrolyzers, it's not very different from solar or wind, where we've seen in the past that there is a so-called learning curve. That the more you make technology, the better you become at it and the cheaper it gets. And the learning curve is a percentage of price or cost reduction by every doubling of output. So solar around about 20-21%. So every time we double the output of solar panels, the cost goes down by 20-21%. And even though it's early days for electrolyzers, there is some initial evidence that points to 18.5%. Again, it's a very small statistical basis, so I don't think that is hard science, but the basic fundamentals are the same. The more scale you have, the better you can manage your supply chain, the more you can invest in increasing efficiency, etc. All of those elements lead in to lower unit costs, and something like electrolyzers. It's not rocket science. I mean, we know where that is going to go. The more we make it, the cheaper it will get. So in the short term, the challenge is how to create markets, how to create demand, so that we can actually start building these factories and make these investments in technology improvements, so that we will become more competitive over time. The challenge is really in the short term, and I think Alka alluded to it. Somebody needs to come up with a solution where we find out who's going to cover the cost gap. Is that a carrot and a stick approach, or a combination of the two? A carbon price, a subsidy, a quota? All of those things need to be figured out. But we know over time it will become cost competitive. There's no doubt.
Right. I mean, of course, Arunabha mentioned that the developing world will be a big will be a big source of demand for green hydrogen, irrespective of whether the developing world is or not. The developed world has to, right? Because they have the imperative and the need to, to make up for, lost time in not having acted over so many decades, which means that they are a natural market for, electrolyzers. So do you see, Frank, a reason for, how India could potentially become what China did for solar panels? Because it's still early days. I mean, we may have already sort of seeded ground because, China can make things happen that fast. Do you see the possibility of, India really being able to mount a manufacturing base that can sort of really become a supplier base for the rest of the world, or at least for, for key consumers? Is that something that, is in the plan or in the works?
Well, I cannot comment at this point in time on these kind of plans, but there is no reason why India could not become that. Really, there is no reason. It's not as common, which is a semiconductor type of technology with some challenges, a lot of IP, etc. I think electrolysis is a little bit more straightforward, and there's no reason why India couldn't lead the world in this.
Sure. So we'll hope that we don't end up missing the bus, and and that we actually create that opportunity. Davide, a quick question for you. I think in the case of electricity, I'll tell you this question is still not settled. Should we move the coal or move the electricity? Has been a problem for India. I know, and unfortunately, the way the pricing is, right, it's still a discussion that a lot of people indulge in, right? Should we be creating transmission infrastructure for electricity, with pithead generation, or do we move the coal? Of course, we're not creating any new coal assets. In the case of hydrogen, right, a similar sort of conundrum exists, right? Do we generate hydrogen at source and then move it through pipelines? Because what happens is that that then creates this dependency on the pipelines materializing for the demand centers to actually then start getting that, right? And creating pipeline infrastructure in India has not been the smoothest, right, when it comes to even the natural gas pipelines that we've had in the past. So, do we see how we can sort of, jump across and ensure that those consumers are being catered to, right? Or exotic options like SSLNG are possibly, there today that might actually compete with natural gas pipelines. In the case of hydrogen, that's definitely not going to be the case. So do you envision sort of, a role for, transmitting electricity, or do you really think that this is going to go down to, transmitting using the gas network and wait for that to get built out?
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, the fact that it has been proven that you can transport green hydrogen in a blended natural gas, it's basically providing you another way to transport it from wherever it can be generated to the final market. So it is something that is fostering the entry of green hydrogen in the industrial processes. So it's something that for sure in the short term it can play a major role, and in the short term and in the, let's say, medium to long term, if the infrastructure that we are building are going to be able to accommodate up to 100% of green hydrogen, then I mean, those infrastructure will have a second life in the future, where basically you will be able to use them as dedicated pathways to deliver green hydrogen. No, I mean, normally right now, natural gas is used in large industrial centers, in urban areas, etc., etc. So they are clearly linking areas which tomorrow could be served by green hydrogen. So it's something that it does make sense. However, this is something that in the future, once the real cost of green hydrogen could be reduced, in some cases, in some areas, it could make sense to generate directly green hydrogen on the spot where it's needed. So for this reason, I mean, when Snam entered the green hydrogen value chain, we sort of like try to assess where were the bottlenecks in the value chain, and clearly the major bottleneck is the electrolyzer manufacturing. So that is why for us it was essential to enter in that sector, and we acquired technologies in both PEM and alkaline and manufacturing players, some of the largest in the world. So we enter in the capital, and right now we are basically using their capability to scale up the setup of green hydrogen. So I mean, it has to be a combination of all the elements and all the possible tools that we have on the table. Pipelines are able to transport big quantities of green hydrogen. And the fact that we're trying to reutilize existing infrastructures is something that is dramatically cutting down on the capex for basically moving hydrogen around.
Sure.
Likewise, it is applicable to basically transporting green hydrogen by ship under the shape of green ammonia to other parts of the world. So India to Europe, for instance, or some other areas. So this is pure midstream activities that we're very much interested together with green hydrogen generation, which is something that it will become more and more important for sure.
The reason I brought it up, Davide, was because industries in India who've basically banked on the infrastructure coming up and set up, natural gas-based processes have burnt their fingers in the past, right? So, if it makes sense for them to actually rely on the grid, set up the electrolyzer closer to where the demand is, they'd rather do that than, basically wait for this process to happen. So, ultimately, it's really in the way we're going to deliver this for Indian industry, right? And they need to have the confidence that the reliable supply of, whether it's hydrogen or electricity is going to come up, and which of the two is more likely to happen. So I think it'll be an important one to address from a policymaker's perspective. We're really 5 minutes over time. I know you guys have been very patient with us. So I'm just going to have this sort of closing, ask for all three of you. The minister mentioned that there's a cabinet note that's going out, right? We are not privy to the details of it, but as representatives of industry, right? If you had an ask or two or three, right, for what you think you would like to see there, right, as something that sort of enables your industrial organization or group to sort of more firmly commit to green hydrogen or hydrogen, right, in some form, right, in the coming decade. What would you like to see there? Of course, it has to be realistic, something that you think the government will actually offer up. And if you think it's already there, then yeah, please say what it is that you think you find in the policy framing that India has already discussed that makes it attractive already. But if there's something missing, please do sort of cite it so that we can factor that and we can communicate that to Mr. RK Singh's office, and hopefully they will take cognizance of it. So we'll sort of go back to Frank. Any wish lists that you have?
I think, if you think about policy, there is, a couple of elements that are crucial. One is very clear targets, but that is not enough. We've seen that in Europe last year. The hydrogen strategy that was released in July 2020 had very clear targets. So the ambition level was there, but it lacked policy detail. And that took more than a year. And basically that was, in my view, a bit of a lost year. Now there's the Fit for 55 package, which showed, how things are going to run. And I think this is something that we also need. We need not just ambition, but also policy detail. How is this going to be implemented?
Okay. Alka, any specific ones? I know you're going to ask for a carbon price, but outside of that.
I'm sort of going to echo what Frank said. What is important for any industry is the confidence that there is going to be a long-term, crystal clear, coherent policy, so that the call can be taken up. These are all high upfront capital investments. These are talking about switching off, the way we have been working. So long-term, clear, visible, coherent policy will be very much required. I'm not putting words I'm not putting carbon price number, but something which is quite coherent and doesn't sort of in some other ministry talks differently. So that is what will be required. Another thing which I believe will be important, and I was looking at the numbers he was talking about, Minister RK Singh, in terms of 8.8 gigawatt and all. I think what is missing here is the electrolyzer and hydrogen manufacturing today is very, very fragmented. If I know rightly, there are 250 players in this space. There is no standardization of the equipments across the value chain. Perhaps there is a need for having a very good definition, common lexicon for the quality and safety and standard around all the components of the value chain.
Okay, that's an interesting ask. I mean, so Alka, when you say coherent policy, right? One must remember, at the end of the day, there are existing regulations, for instance, for environmental performance. Right. For instance, we have a PAT scheme, that talked about, that had aggressive reduction target, not enough aggressive reduction targets. And one could argue that, even sort of pursuing those to a point where the use of conventional fuels, becomes unviable, right, is also sort of, a strategy enough. But the challenge is that we've seen industry push back finally, because when it comes to the economics, right. So I think, we've had coherent, advocating of, environmental outcomes for industry, but we found that, I think industry, I'm not suggesting that it's wrong, right? At the end of the day, you are responsible for your shareholders and for, the bottom line. But I feel that at some point, we have resisted aggressive reductions in, energy efficiency targets and, for instance, even implementation of environmental norms. And let's ensure, we're not doing this for the rest of the world, right? We're doing this very much for local outcomes in India, right? And we're hoping that hydrogen can also help it. So I would think that there is, in some sense, that environmental stewardship is already there, but obviously, what you've mentioned is clearly also needed.
This is another subject for another conversation, Karthik. Let's discuss then.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let's listen to David.
Absolutely, Davide. As a new entrant to India, you guys have a partnership with Adani, which is a big industrial house, and of course they have big plans of making gas more prominent in India. But and you've got partnerships on electrolyzer manufacture. So as an entity that's sort of really looking to cash in on this space, what's your sort of ask for what should be clear in that policy, in the way this scheme is or the mission is going document is going to look like? Yeah.
Well, obviously, there are several advantages in India which are kind of unique to the country, and therefore it makes it one of the best location worldwide to generate green hydrogen. Now, having said so, what is important is always to be able to bridge the gap between gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, which is not very present anyways here, and green hydrogen. That gap in India is very small, and is significantly smaller than in other parts of the world, Europe or some of the other geographies. But there's still a gap. Now, whatever the government, and here, by the way, thank you for bringing around the same table corporates and policymakers, because that is essential to determine when the switch to green hydrogen will happen. If there is no interaction between the two areas, it will happen at a later stage. If there is an interaction between politics and corporates, that change will happen earlier. So thanks for that, it was really useful. Now, this bridge, it's small, so whatever the government can do in order to support companies to switch to green hydrogen, such as, the policy that has been announced and that we're all waiting for, mandatory offtakes of green hydrogen, started from a certain period, 2023, 2024, those things are essential. Those things are essential to push the transition forward and to make sure that whatever is due to happen will happen sooner than later. So that's for sure something that it's really very much appreciated that the Indian government is putting a lot of efforts onto.
Absolutely, yeah. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. So let's figure out and see, to what extent some of these mandatory targets actually end up being met. We've had, as I said, it's a sector that's kind of come out of the blue, really. And a lot of people are grappling with how am I going to sort of meet these targets, even when you look at established sectors like renewable energy procurement. We've had challenges with making governments and obligated entities meet these targets, how easy is it going to be in the case of industries which are under a lot more pressure, right? Especially given the current environment climate, is something that's still to be seen. So let's hope that the government is able to factor in all of these challenges and come up with a fantastic proposal that will make the goals of 111, as Mr. Ambani has voiced earlier this year come true. And with that, I'd really sort of like to thank all of our panelists today from the industry. Thank you so much, Alka, Frank, and Davide, for engaging with us candidly, and for really, telling us what exactly is it that you feel, right, is the challenge before, this massive mission that the government of India is trying to undertake. I also wanted to sort of reiterate to all the participants who are, the audience who's here, that there are 2 fantastic studies that we put out, notwithstanding the constraints of not having answered some of the questions that Alka has talked about, which is the stranded assets in BF-BOF. The report does capture what the opportunity that the steel industry does see, right, in the case of new builds, right? And we hope that that will sort of instill some debate into the area, and we hope that there will be some uptake. And a big round of thank you to all of the the government entities, the various country embassies and their and their representatives who've actually been part of the session today. I leave it to Arunabha to sort of formally sort of close off this session as well. Arunabha, with your final words if you have any. But otherwise, thank you so much everyone for having been with us. Yeah.
Thank you, Karthik.
Once again, many thanks, not to keep you all away from whatever you have planned for the rest of the evening. But once again, many thanks for this very rich discussion. I think something that Davide was saying struck a chord right at the end. If government and private sector could come together, the transition could be faster. And I was making a similar point. If countries could come together, it would be faster and give that kind of long-term signal that Alka and Frank have also highlighted. I think it's very clear the direction of travel is known. The imperative of the direction of travel is known. The only question is how fast will the train go, and will it be a green hydrogen driven train? So once again, many thanks to everyone. And I want to once again thank the representatives of Chile, Denmark, the United Kingdom and Germany for presenting their views. And my particular thanks to the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, the Honorable Minister, the Honorable Minister of State, and the Honorable Secretary to the Ministry. Thank you for your partnership and for leading from the front in driving as the global champions for the energy transition under the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy. From CEEW, thanks very much. I hope to see you in the next Parishad webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.